Welcome back to part 2 of the Johnson 25 horsepower outboard rebuild. Last time we left off after having gotten this thing to run finally. However, there were some things that still needed work. The motor was not peeing, so we ordered an impeller. Hopefully that'll solve our problem. We needed some spark plugs for it, and there were several parts that we needed for the controls that were missing. So we've got the detent spring and the detent ball for the controls, as well as the bolt that holds on the control lever. Then we've got our impeller here, and unfortunately one single spark plug. We're going to need two, so I messed that up. I have another one on order. Luckily, the ones that I have are not far off. They are simply missing the Q. Could be the same things for all I know. I think I'll start with getting the controls back together, and then I will pull the lower unit and we'll get that impeller on there. So everything's been a little bound up, and I've been trying to get this piece off. It didn't want to move out of the way. With a little persuasion, I got it. Let me get this little keeper off of here, maybe. Finally. I'm gonna keep on banging on this, and I'm gonna keep on banging on this, and I'll get it off. All right, so it just took some persuasion, but I did get this keeper off and this turnbuckle off, so that I could get the bottom plate and I can slide off the impeller housing if need be. I actually don't think I need to. Looking at this impeller, it is old, but it is not, it's not to the point where it shouldn't have been pumping any water. I think what happened is that there is a water tube in here. I think when somebody went to change the impeller or did some service, pulled the lower unit for whatever reason, they failed to seat the water tube further up here inside this leg. So obviously I'm going to replace this impeller and I'm going to put it back together, making sure to seat this properly. And I'll see if I can show you. It's going to be hard to get a good view up in there. Let's see if I can show you. So that is the exhaust housing just below. That's where the exhaust comes down. If you look just below that, that is where that water tube needs to seat into. It would look like this when I looked up there the first time, but I also did pull on this housing a little bit, so I don't know for sure where this water tube was seated originally. I'm going to be sure to make sure it is seated in that slot. Also, what you can do is check to make sure there's no kinks or crimps in this copper tubing, because once it gets kinked, it's almost impossible to unkink it. And I don't think it would be very easy to find that part on this model, this year model. So I'm gonna try to pry this off. This impeller is kind of seized onto here. It's like so many things on here, saltwater motors. I'm gonna pry that off and get the new one on. Alright, so we got the lower unit back on and the shift linkage is hooked up. Didn't bother putting the prop back on or that little cover right here. I really just want to run this thing and make sure that it actually pumps water like it's supposed to and isn't overheating. Once I can confirm the functionality of this thing, I'm going to give this thing a deeper wash. I've already washed it once, but I'm going to give it a deeper wash. Try to get the rest of this caked up grease off. That way I can get it prepped for paint, because that's going to be the final step, I believe. All right, here we go. Let's see what happens. Sweet. So it's running good. It's peeing good. Shift's fine. It's not overheating. So I think we're good to go. I'm going to give it a few more cold starts. It was a little tough to start initially, but I had drained all the fuel and everything out of the carburetor. So I'll probably give it a couple more cold starts throughout the day, even though it's hot outside, but you know, unprimed starts, I should say. And then I'm going to give it a nice bath. Try to degrease it as much as possible. We'll move back inside and get busy with the paint. All right, we got this thing washed and degreased and almost ready for paint. Gonna have to do a light coat. First of all, I have to get the remainder of this decal off. I'm gonna take some of this hardware off that I don't want to get paint on, and then I'm gonna give this thing a light scuff coat of sanding. The pressure washer was able to get a lot of most of the chipping paint off. While I'm sanding, I'll evaluate if any more of the old paint needs to come off, because I want this new paint to get a decent bond in it here and not just chip off again in the future like this did. While I was, one thing to note, it's important to make sure you degrease these things completely, or else the paint is not going to work like it's supposed to. And two of the biggest areas, the most important areas, are generally around here and here. So the sole part of that bracket, the grease always seeps out of that, and on older motors like this, it tends to cake up, so you'll have years and years worth of caked up grease in those areas. I've done it with just engine degreaser. It doesn't work the best. I actually came across a chemical that I used to use with my old job. It's called Spray 9, and that stuff, I mean, it completely dissolved all of that grease. It made it, I mean, it was like it was nothing. It was like salt dissolving in water. Let me see if I can find the bottle. Yeah, so this stuff here, this is Spray 9. It's not just a degreaser. It's supposed to kill viruses and whatnot and all that stuff. So it's a disinfectant. In this case, I use it for the degreasing. And I wish I had honestly, it worked so well, I wish I had shown it on video so that you could see how well it works. But anyways, so it's completely degreased. While I was pressure washing this thing, I got to contemplating why this thing, because it's a little bit hard to start. And well, the first thing I thought of was, something's wrong with the primer. And lo and behold, something was not necessarily wrong with the primer, but let's see if I can get a nice close-up view here. So that's the primer, this thing right here. It takes fuel in. Somewhere there's a T where fuel will go. Where fuel comes into the motor, it goes to a T, and then it'll go to the fuel pump, and then it also goes to this primer here. Then you can see right here, maybe this tube. Tube coming out of the primer there actually goes to the back of the carburetor here. So it basically just injects fuel straight into the back of the carburetor. The problem is when I moved this starter so that I could get access to pull this carburetor off, when I put it back in, I actually pinched off this hose. So there was no fuel. None of the fuel from the primer was getting to the carburetor, which was what was making it hard to start. So fix that problem, starts right up now. Now let me go ahead and get busy with the painting. He's a happy boy. Alright, so we got all of this prepped for paint. Took some sandpaper to it at 120 grit just to rough it up. Rubbed it down with acetone. I took off a lot of the hardware that I didn't want to get painted. For instance, this latch here and the cable holder there for the throttle. And and the rest we just taped off that we don't want to get painted. It's not going to be a professional paint job, but it should be pretty good. The main thing is we wanted the paint to adhere, which is why we used the sandpaper and the acetone to make sure there's no leftover grease or oils on there. So the next step is a couple coats of primer, and then we're going to hit it with the Johnson Evinrude paint, white colored paint that I ordered online.